Here's Laura and Bernhard, and thank you so much, you guys, for agreeing to do this. I know how I found you guys, and I know why it's so important for me that we do this today. But for the audience, so there are a lot of people here who are going to catch this tomorrow morning because it's really late here in India, and everyone's like subscribed to the channel and they're waiting to watch this tomorrow morning. But I just wanted to kind of get the audience to know also about how each of you started this work, right? Like both of you had your own journeys, both of you had your own paths, and then now you've come and you've started doing the Embodied Soul Awakening program, which I was part of, and I'm going to talk about that as well, that the experience and the learning that came through that. But Laura, what was your journey? How did you come on this path of learning how to be a psycho-spiritual coach?
How did it all start? Well, I mean, I got really into spirituality really young, like maybe 17, 18. I was really into Alan Watts and like Ram Dass. But then I really went through an intense, like 10 plus year dark night of the soul with lots of trauma, lots of abuse, lots of addiction. And I consider actually that a big part of my journey looking back, because a lot of those experiences have really helped me in being able to work with people. And yeah, basically the turning point happened in 2012, where I basically got out of a detox center. I was trying to recover from like years of prescription drug abuse, which I was using as a way to mask the pain of the trauma I experienced. And I had this real profound turning to the divine. And in my like darkest moments, got on my knees and prayed, and then God actually, divine grace, helped me out of the situation that I was in. But it wasn't easy. There's like a long road ahead of me of healing myself in body, mind, spirit, and beyond. So I started getting into yoga and meditation in 2012. That resulted in a lot of spiritual bypassing eventually. And then I started getting into deep psychological work, like Carl Jung's work, trauma work. And I really just found that the missing piece in a lot of kind of the spiritual communities that I was being a part of from 2012 onwards was the deep psychological work. And that's what really helped me. So I think our work just kind of spawned out of that, is like trying to bridge the gap between the psychological and the spiritual, because unless we have a really solid understanding of our basic psychology, trauma, early childhood conditioning, attachment, all those things, then we can't actually anchor, or I couldn't actually anchor a higher state of awareness. So I found that it was really necessary in this modernized world to integrate psychology to prevent this kind of spiritual bypassing that was so common. So yeah, I think that's kind of how it started. And then people just started reaching out to me, similar to Bernhard, how he started coaching. And I studied different somatic therapeutic modalities like compassion and inquiry and IFS, evolutionary astrology. And then I just ended up with this like toolkit that I use to understand myself that I could use for others as well. So that's kind of the somewhat short version of
Yes,
it.
and that's such an amazing story. And, I am really glad you exist. Like I've said that to you guys a couple of times in the course as well. Not that I think any of us should experience the trauma that we experience, but then when we look at it from a different perspective and we see how it aided our learning. So I'm sorry for everything that you experienced, but then I'm so glad that you exist now and you could teach me so many things that I needed to learn in the 3 month course that I did with you. Bernard, what's your story? Like, how did you come into this space? I know that you did a lot of work with body work and that kind of work. So, but I don't really like, and I've been reading your articles, I've been reading your podcast much before I came to the course also. So I always thought of you as this guy who spoke about the matrix, who spoke about like the entities and all of that, but I don't really know how you came into this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's all. Like, let's put in a nutshell. Yeah, growing up in Germany, where I'm originally from, I was just always, alone and not being able to fit in. Early being very emotionally sensitive. My refugee was music, and eventually moved to the U.S. at the age of 22 to Los Angeles to study drums and percussion and pursue music career and just be artistic and express myself musically. And these are great times, but more and more came up. And when people ask me, like, the common question is, how did you get into this work? And I always answered, because I was suffering, right? My own suffering really pushed me to, like, ask questions, not only to know myself, but because I couldn't fit in, I started to question the world, reality. There must be more than what we've been taught and told. So that's where I tumbled down the rabbit hole, questioning the world, getting into conspiracies, very different, the hyperdimensional, entities and all of that, and just question everything what we've been told and taught. At the same time, I also realized early on, as you see in the course, that the inner work and outer work need to go together, right? So it's not just about questioning the world and just figuring out mentally, but also the inner work. And they cannot be separated. And early on, I guess in the 90s, I first heard through, I had my mentors and teachers at Peer, got into Jungian shadow work early on, studied that. And then also out of my music career, that kind of faded away, but I found another healing gift, which was body work. And I became a professional body worker, massage therapist, healer, had my own private practice for over 15 years. So out of that emerged my own coaching process or coaching work as well. And I also realized the most important is the somatic approach as well, especially the psychotherapeutic or psychological approach. So it's not just the talk therapy or intellectualizing, but it needs to happen somatically through the body. So my journey, I was also dealing with trauma, more developmental trauma, childhood wounding and things I wasn't really aware of, because you really, once you dig down, as you maybe know, stuff all of a sudden emerges and you didn't realize you had it. So it's the ongoing work. And similar to Laura, like, I think we can summarize our journeys as the archetypal wounded healer, right? The healer, so to speak. You heal yourself and you're able to help others. So we're in this process continuously ourselves. And then when I met Laura, we just, really complement each other very well with my work, my experience, and my teachings, and her work and what she has studied. So we brought it all together, and it fits perfectly to the times we're in right now to really have this multidimensional, multidisciplinary approach. Because what we also noticed that what works for one may not work for another. We're all very unique beings with unique lessons, so there needs to be different approaches. But the key point is this holistic, integral approach. That's the key point, really working on all levels. And that's what our course, our work is based on, as you know, this fourfold approach of holistic self-work on physical, emotional, psychological, intellectual level, the inner work in context of what's happening in the world, understanding the bigger picture, the evolution of consciousness, the cycles. Also evolutionary astrology. Laura is also an amazing evolutionary astrologer.
Yeah, I got my full reading done from her, and like that was a revelation as well when that
exactly happened. So just bringing all these things in, and then kind of we continue to work, and we never take ourselves out of the equation when it comes to the work. We're still engaged in it, our own inner work, our relationship work, and we keep continuing. And I think this is very necessary to engage in this work consciously in this day and age we're in.
Yep. So I've been someone who's been seeking spiritual knowledge from the time I was a kid, I think. Like, I've always been curious and I've been trying to build that relationship. And I went through my fair share of spiritual teachers in India. And I think I spoke about one cult that I was part of. And then when I found you guys and the way the course was structured, it was done so beautifully. And I think the entire emphasis on one, like, never disregarding the self, because a lot of teachings here are about, like, like completely surrendering, not really looking at yourself, giving up your desires, giving up your ego, not really honoring your needs, your feelings, and completely discarding that. So that was one. There was one teacher with whom that was happening a lot, and then there was one teacher with whom it was just love and light and like no psychological work at all, right? So for the first time, like for me, it was like I found, at least at this point of time in life, whatever I needed in terms of being able to integrate every aspect of my growth. It really came through, right? So the body work, the qigong that you guys taught, the yoga, that the lessons that are there, I still do them, Laura. Like, I do the yoga, I do the compassion meditation that you put in the end of the course. I find that extremely beautiful, and the one that you put where you ask for help, for divine help. So both of them really sometimes just help me when things get a little messy. And then for me, the IFS, that was completely so. The way you guys have designed and structured the course, right? Like being able to use the tools to kind of go deep into my own psyche and like actually have things that I can work on. Now the course is over. It's a month since I think we finished our last sync up or the last call, and I'm still able to use tools and I'm still able to resolve stuff. So I think for the first time, I really found a course that integrated spirituality with psychology, with body work, and gave me tools to kind of, just change my life's trajectory. So thank you so much for that. Um, but today's live is really like I would keep talking about you guys when I would go on my short lives on my Insta and Facebook, and then the people in my like my clients and my academy students would be like, "Who are these guys that you keep talking about? And what's the work?" And then, can we ask them our questions? I was like, "Yeah, let me check in with them." So. Most of the questions that I'm going to ask you today are questions that these folks have already sent in. And I mean, if you guys are okay, I would want to
Yeah,
get started on those questions.
totally.
Yeah,
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 I don't know how
totally.
much time I have with you, but there are a lot of questions there. And also, before we get there, I want to show you this. I don't know where the final version is, but this is what came out of the course. At the end of it, I was like guided towards creating this. It's a
Oh,
new
wow.
program that I'm putting together at iThrive. It's called Embracing the Human
Oh, wow.
Experience. Yeah. And it's
Awesome.
like
Nice.
it's all the work that we've done with functional medicine, functional nutrition, the blood test, and the body work and everything, and then integrating this aspect, right? So it's thank you so much for bringing that
Awesome.
out of me. All right, so going to the questions. So these are not in any particular order. I've just put them down as people send them to me. The first
Yeah.
question here is, how do we uncover our soul mission in the world?
Mm.
Hmm.
Well, may I start?
You can start, yeah.
Well, soul mission, the way I see it, people, that's a big loaded word, soul purpose. What is the soul purpose? And people usually think it's this big thing I need to do and this grand thing, and then the ego can easily hijack it, right? But it's important to understand that the ultimate soul purpose, the purpose of the soul, is to unite with the divine, is self-realization over lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes. So in that context, soul purpose is not necessarily a thing you do, a job you have, or all of that you identify with. So the bigger picture is the evolution of consciousness to become, self-realized, to come closer to your true self, right? To unite with the divine over lifetimes. However, depending on your own karmic lessons, on your talents and gifts, it can express itself in various ways that is very unique to each of us. So that's what we want to find, that unique expression of our soul evolution through whatever we do. And I realize we all are such unique individuals. We all have something special within ourselves, like the secret cargo, the secret gift, as one of my teachers would say, that we can contribute to others that only we can do and nobody else can do.
Yeah.
Right. And that also cancels out competition or rivalry. I
Yeah.
mean, too many people look externally and they copy each other, and they just really don't dive deeper. So to really find this deeper soul purpose or this deeper gift, it requires work, it requires struggle, it requires to get out of your comfort zone, it requires risk, right? Trying things out, and it requires the inner work. I did there's a saying, I don't know if you guys have it in India, but the saying here, tell God your plans and he will laugh at you. Right. So most often the soul purpose is not what we think it is. It's not what our ego wants. When I came to the US, I thought my soul purpose is to be a musician, play my drums for the rest of my life, be a rock star and heal people with music. This completely got destroyed. Like the divine pulled the rug under me out. And then all of a sudden I totally found this other gift, body work, and now I'm doing the work I'm doing now. And if you'd have told me that 15 or what years ago that I'm doing what I'm doing now, I would have not believed you. So purpose in that sense is also, it's not a thing that just appears. It's a journey, right?
Yeah.
It changes, it
Yeah.
accumulates, it might, who knows what I'll be or will be doing in a few years from now. So it's continuously changing, but it expresses itself uniquely through you. And the inner work is key. I'm more aligned with and better at it when I'm really, I'm closer to essence, have worked for my short on trauma. So my work is not just infused by my own unconscious trauma or projections.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my.
And I think it's like a prerequisite is to understand yourself and to undo your own conditioning, because a lot of what people think is their sole purpose can get mixed up with what parents told them to do, society told them to do. So that deconditioning process, which is an essential part of the individuation process, finding out what's unique about you is really essential. And that begins with knowing yourself, like engaging in consistent self-inquiry. Why am I like this? Why do I have this desire? So that you can get rid of any of the ones that aren't in alignment with what you are here to bring to the world. And I think that's the biggest piece is like, I think that maybe in India too, it's all about abandon the self and like there's
Yes.
no, have no self. And yeah, that's true on a higher level, but I find actually a lot of people who at least find us, they don't even know who they are. They don't know what they like. They don't know what they don't like. They don't know what they want to do with their lives. They don't know what kind of relationship to be in. So that's the first thing to understand is that even if you eventually want to sacrifice yourself to the greater self, like the Indian teachings talk about, you have to have a self to sacrifice to begin with. So I think really getting to know what makes me uniquely me. And then Joseph Campbell has this quote, or it was Joseph Campbell, but I forget, but someone has this quote that you think about what you like lost hours in doing as a child. Joseph and that Campbell will start to give you a clue because usually children are closer to essence. Even with myself, like I used to actually just talk to my tape recorder in my room when I was a kid and like put on radio shows. And now we're doing a podcast. So it all works out.
Yeah, well, Joseph Campbell, he's a amazing writer about mythology and the hero's journey, also shadow work. He has the expression, follow your bliss. What he means by like your deeper soul purpose, something aligned like that ties into the joy of the inner child. You do something that excites you. And you do it just for the sheer joy of doing it without expectations of outcome or any reward. You just love it for the sake of doing it. That kind of brings you closer to your quote unquote soul purpose.
Yes. Yeah, I really get what you're saying. And for me also, for a long time, I thought my sole purpose was to kind of heal 1 million people. And then that also, I like the quantification of that number. I was like, where does this come from? And like, and then like I think Laura, you told me this when you did my evolutionary astrology reading that my business is just a front for my spiritual work, right? And what I've realized right now is like, all that I really want to do is just clear up as much energy that I've put in different places, this lifetime, the past lifetimes, so that I can like literally leave without any baggage, right? I don't have to come back to check for my lost baggage here again. And I've told you, Laura, this like I don't really want to come back here again because it's quite a mad planet, as beautiful as it is. Yeah, but I totally get what you're saying about like going back to your childhood. But also, this question comes out of what you just said, right? Like the fact that eventually the sole purpose is to go merge with the divine. And this is like, I think I'd asked you this in the course as well, and then this came up again in the last week. Like someone was saying that this entire merging thing is a psyop, and it's like it's new age, and we're not really
merging with the divine as a psyop.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah, so merging with the divine is a psyop, and it's very new age. And like if the divine wanted us to merge, then why would we be created as separate consciousnesses in the first place? So we're meant to be separate. I'm like, no, it doesn't feel like that to me. Like I really want to go back. Have you heard of that? Like that merging with the divine is a psyop and it's new age?
Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. I've dug down the rabbit hole of conspiracies and fringe deep. I mean, people who have known my work on Veil of Reality or Karmic go very deep into alien hyperdimensional stuff. And I've seen a lot of stuff out there, dead ends, a lot of nonsense too. And one of the things I find personally is nonsense is the idea, maybe that's what you're hinting at, that the reincarnation is a trap for the soul, right?
Yes.
Not the trap. So there's one part of it where they're saying the tunnel of light and the reincarnation trap.
Oh, the tunnel of light is a trap.
Like they're like, even if you don't go into the tunnel of light, you don't get reincarnated. Just wanting to merge with the divine is another psyop. And I'm like, how? Like in what world?
Yeah, but for me, like the way I actually wrote an article, I sent you the article. I go deep into that. But for me, that's kind of like literally the ego hijacking something it cannot trying to rationalize or reject without even any possibility of understanding. Because when we talk about the tunnel of light, afterlife, reincarnation, and all of what's happening after death, that's impossible for the mind to grasp, right? So we have this very limited human ignorance, and as Sri Aurobindo would say, the mind is an instrument of the ignorance, right? So it doesn't make sense, like even like, okay, when I die, I'm going to take a left or right so I don't go to the tunnel of light, you know. Even karma in itself, as you know, in India has also been very abused, used for social control. We know it, but we don't want to throw the baby with the bathwater. It's a universal law, hermetic principles, the law of cause and effect, but it's very complex. It's not, you know, we tend to take these higher truths and put into human morality into them and judge them through a human mind, which is impossible to grasp. So we really need to, like, you know, I have very humbling moments to acknowledge to myself that I don't know. That's really what it comes down to, right? But that the ego doesn't like. That requires a certain level of vulnerability to rest in the unknown, right? So I've seen all this stuff in the New Age, in the French, and I'm just like, you know, for me, there's also a lot of people have done, I noticed, really deeper, sincere inner work on the basic psychological level, as you know, your shadow work, your traumas, because a lot of these reactions, what people then identify with, for example, oh, I'm a starseed, I'm a you know, alien coming from this planet. That most often is a trauma response, right?
Ascended light worker.
Exactly.
Yeah,
all of that.
it can be a disassociative trauma response. So like you don't want to deal with things in reality in your life in the present moment. So you enter a different dimension. Like I'm just in 12D now. I don't have to deal with that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that there's
that
no
as
truth.
well. When I was a vegan doing the love and light thing, I did that stuff as well, right? Oh, let's like,
yeah, me too. Yeah.
Same here. I mean, I had my New Age phase, spiritual bypassing. I'm not saying there's not truth to these concepts. There, I believe many of us incarnated in this day and age with a mission profile to help this transformation in this time of transition, but the ego can easily hijack it.
The ego loves to hijack spiritual identities to like it just hijacks every spiritual insight you have, and then it's like I'm so enlightened, you know. And so you can notice it too when you have like a peak experience, and then there'd be a part of your ego that's like, oh, I'm special, I need to teach people, you know. So we have to constantly check ourselves on that. Not to say that the ego is bad and needs to be demonized, you know, but it's just a way that the ego tries to hijack the spiritual journey, basically. Did the camera stop, honey?
Are we frozen or?
Yeah, I can see you guys.
You can see us?
Yeah, I can see
Can
you.
You just?
Okay, fine. On our end,
can you just start it and restart it, honey, real quick? Is that okay? Just this one? No, just this one. Sorry.
Which one?
This one right here. Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Oh, no, she's.
We can see ourselves.
Okay, sorry.
All right. Next question is, how do we navigate the fear-based mind matrix while our own holistic self-work is going on?
Yeah, I think also, I'm not sure what they mean by fear-based mind matrix, but the matrix does operate on fear, you know? And so understanding your nervous system, understanding trauma is probably a key piece of that, because we're kind of in, I mean, I see it everywhere, actually. Even the stress of the past couple of years has created a massive trauma for people. And I see people just getting in these trauma loops, these doom and gloom scripts, and kind of just cycling over the same things over and over. So it is really important that we learn how to regulate our nervous systems. We learn how to heal trauma. And we also just, you know, the fear-based mind matrix, I assume they're talking about like what kind of goes on the news. Just check out of it. Like, don't check it. Like just take breaks. If it's affecting you too much, I think people need to consciously disengage from this kind of major divide and conquer constant fear porn we have going on. And especially if you want to discover your soul purpose, because what I see most of all is that people are wasting their lives and creative energy battling the shadows on the wall right now. And yes, it's important to speak out. I think a lot of us made a huge difference by speaking out against the jab and really being outspoken. It definitely spread awareness, you know, but don't get trapped on that, you know, like find something you can contribute to the new world instead of getting caught in like what they're doing, the next piece of news. You know, I see people get sucked into that lately, and you know, there's much better ways to spend our time.
And I saw that with a lot of the young people in India who kind of got awakened. So Johan does a lot of work on this, and like the 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and like when they realized there was an agenda going on, there was this raw energy that was a rebellious energy, and like they just wanted to vent and be angry. And I think even with me, like in the course, I think Bernhard once spoke about this. Like I was getting nightmares and random stuff happening, and then I'd asked you guys, and then you'd said like unless there's a hook for the fear to hook onto, there's no way fear can really get into you, right? And then I had to pull
Exactly.
out. Yeah,
Exactly. That's what I wanted to add when you say fear-based. Well, the matrix frequency is fear, right? So if you get tap into fear, you're kind of feeding that. So you can use it as a teaching function. What can this fear teach me? A lot of information, because a lot of people are also afraid to speak out, for example, because of the
yes,
fear, right? But that's what keeps the matrix in check as well. So people are even afraid of their own power to stand out, and like it goes deeper and deeper. Fear is literally the obstacle to truly fulfill ourselves in all areas of life in general, and that's how the matrix keeps us enclosed. But also what you mentioned, or what I want to add, what Laura said, the problem. That's why I go back to the inner work is so important, because if you just go information based and you just rant all the time, as I used to do, sometimes we need to rant, like we get upset. But what does it really help? We are playing shadow dance, like we're projecting our shadow onto the world. So action is needed. We don't want to get into the other extreme and just like, oh, just meditate in the mountain and just
Everything will
avoid
be
life
fine,
and
yeah.
everything. That's the new age trap. Like I just needed to meditate in peace. Now action is needed, but it needs to be conscious action. Where's this action coming from? Because I can see I had my social warrior, justice warrior days back in the days, activism, getting on protests, speaking out for
yeah.
Palestine and all the victims
Yeah,
in the
I was
world.
on the streets as well. I was once on the
You know,
street in support of Greta Thunberg.
but I see that was also coming from my own projection and not understand, you know what I mean? Like my own wounding, like my own, sometimes we can avoid our own inner process by just externalizing. The ego hijacks, oh, I'm doing so much good for the other world, but we're not really taking care of our inner life and asking, where's it coming from?
Yeah.
So action's needed, and we need to speak out, but where is it coming from? That's really the question.
All right. I think that answers the question. What are some of the tools to deal with soul fragmentation? Is it even possible to integrate fragmented selves?
Yeah, so one of my favorite tools is definitely internal family systems therapy, where you basically work with subpersonalities, and learn how to kind of constellate them around self so that you're more self-led rather than led by your subpersonality. So that's a great modality to look into. And is it even possible to integrate the fragmented self? Yes, it is, but it does take sincerity. It does take a certain amount of access to self energy within yourself, or with a therapist that has access to self energy. So you're looking for someone who has curiosity, compassion, courage, and yeah, it is possible, but it really takes sincere work, and even a connection to self is really essential. And yeah, I would say one of the best things I've used is internal family systems therapy. I know there's other modalities, but there's like soul retrieval, shamanic soul retrieval, but I find that this is the most easy to implement when working with different fragmented subpersonalities.
For me as well, the IFS was really the key that unlocked a lot of stuff during the course, and I've been using it. In fact, like in the last couple of weeks, the IFS, I don't know what I've done, but with using IFS, there's something new that's happened, right? So I've been able to take a huge part of my personality that was alive with a lot of energy attached to it, and that experienced a lot of various emotions, right? Like there was guilt and shame and all of that. And that persona wasn't really serving me anymore at all. I mean, it had built up over the last 12 years. It was like based on the attachment to my daughter and everything, and like it just wasn't needed anymore. I could identify that it existed through the IFS work, and then I did the meditations that you have, right? Like the protector in the exile and everything. And once my self realized that this energy structure wasn't needed anymore, the rest of like the system just decided to take it back in, right? Like it literally felt like there was one dream where it looked like things just disassembled itself and then reassembled and became integrated into a different whole structure. And then yeah, so what happened was through the meditations, this persona then just came up even more. It did all the things that it was doing, right? Like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, the food that it wanted to eat, everything came up. And then I actually honored that person. I was like talking to it in my head, like Bernhard had once said in one of the Zoom calls. And I was talking to her, I was like, okay, what do you want to eat? What do you want to do? How do you want to behave? What is it that you want? And I did all of that. And after it was entirely honored, respected, seen and heard and everything, it just went and integrated with the rest of myself. And I don't feel that persona anymore. It's just not there. Like,
Yes, that's the whole point. That's
yeah.
the whole point, is you're trying to return your self energy. So we develop these certain parts of ourselves as survival mechanisms, the coping mechanisms, they're adaptive, you know. But once they realize that things have changed and you're in a different situation now and you don't need them to play such an extreme role, they just return to self energy. Yeah. So that also shows that you had enough access to self energy to do that yourself, and you'll feel just more like yourself. You know,
Yeah,
you won't
I
feel
do.
like you have to be these different personalities.
Yeah, I want to add to this. One of the reasons why IFS, Internal Family System, works so well, so practical, applicable, is also because nowadays when even people say soul fragmentation or soul retrieval, they can easily like, it's also hijacked or distorted this idea. You know, and people think they need to see a shaman who's going to put them together or something, or retrieve mystical, but it's very practical. Now it's basically parts that have been disowned or have been disowned in our childhood because it wasn't safe, or trauma, or caretakers we were shunned and shamed in many different ways, and we have exiled it, right? So we can retrieve them in ourselves. You don't need to go to Peru to drink ayahuasca with the shaman to bring it back. You can.
True.
But that's why IFS works really well.
Yeah, having someone to help you is only essential if you have difficulty accessing self energy. So actually, in your case, because you've already gotten into the spiritual stuff, it may have assisted you in guiding yourself through that process. But when someone is like dealing with real trauma, or not real trauma, but like more intense trauma and fragmentation, where they're just very disassociated, having some sort of therapist or healer who can hold that self energy can also help your self energy come back online.
Yeah, for me also, I did therapy with Leanne, who was part of the course, right? So doing that with her kind of gave me the ability to do this post therapy after sessions with her were over. I kind of, because she held that space for me as well. So yeah, it is possible to do this. Sometimes you need someone to hold the space, and once you learn the tools, I think you can do it. So now my brain's like is always in this way of like looking at more efficient ways of existing, right? So it's looking for all the other parts of me that might be there that might not really be needed anymore. And it's like what other energy structures are there that could be like, that could at any time pull me down, and you know.
Yeah, and they all have like a positive intention. Like all these different sub personalities are all trying to help us in some way. It's that.
Oh, I lost you guys. I think it's your internet. So yeah, while we wait for Laura and Bernard to come back, what we were talking of was primarily something called as internal family systems, and I think there are a few practitioners in India who now offer this. Yeah, they're frozen. I know, Pratishta. It's their internet. I can see that it's like literally zero. So we'll wait for them to come back because we have so many more questions to be answered. Not INFS, it's IFS, internal family systems. Yay, you guys are back.
Okay,
We're
perfect.
back. Okay,
yeah, okay.
There we go. Happened.
All
Excellent.
right. Yeah. Okay. How do we differentiate between trauma triggers and actual intuition? I think that's a really good question. That's something that I struggle with sometimes myself, even now.
Yeah, I'm just gonna refer, I did a video about this. You can follow me on Instagram, and I'm gonna just kind of go over what I wrote there. So trauma responses tend to create nervous system dysregulation or are coming from an already dysregulated nervous system. So if I'm in high anxiety or even disassociation or freeze, like you basically have to know your nervous system first as a prerequisite, then I'm not trusting any of the intuitive insights that I'm getting. It doesn't mean that I could be picking the stuff up. It's just that I need to downregulate in order to get to that place of clarity.
Yeah.
Trauma responses also will be very urgent, fear-based, like, oh my God, something bad's going to happen. Like I need to do something right away, right? Doesn't mean that there isn't emergency situations where we need to act on, but this is usually the tone of a trauma response. They all
Okay, while we wait for them to come back. So yeah, Chiranjeevi, I will ask you a question on psychedelics. It's there in my list of questions. And any other questions, please put them here. Whenever they're back, I will ask them the questions that are there.
There we go. Perfect.
Hey, so I don't know. Our internet seems to be fine. I don't know what's going on. So
When did I cut off?
You were talking about trauma responses, how they can create a nervous system dysregulation, and
Yes,
usually
yeah.
very urgent, and like it's like you have to work on it right now.
Totally, yeah. And then there's also these disassociative trauma responses where you like basically like fantasy thinking. So you're like, oh, I don't need to pay my rent because the archangels are going to come in and just, eliminate all debt. Like that's the disassociative trauma response. Or like, I don't have to deal with this because Jesus saved me or whatever. So I see that happening more in the spiritual community, but that's also to be considered, because if a response is appealing to your worst fears or your hopes, then just be suspicious of it, because it can be filtered through your own emotional responses. And then intuition, I mean, this is just my own experience, but it feels like an aha moment, like just suddenly just all the pieces fit together in one moment. It's really soft and gentle, I notice. So the voice is it's not urgent. It just kind of gives you that information suddenly. It also offers information that would be impossible for you to know given what you currently know about the situation, meaning the person hasn't said it, they haven't said it in body language, you can't deduce it via, common sense. It's like just information that you shouldn't even know. Like I pick up stuff all the time, from Bernhard. Bernhard will be thinking of something and I just pick that up. Like that isn't me picking up to some thought form around him. Yeah. And then a prerequisite for tuning into intuition is a still mind, an open heart, and a relaxed nervous system, and bonus connections for connection to the divine. In fact, I know a few psychics who, in order to develop their psychic abilities, which is like, something that people are interested in, I wouldn't recommend it. But what they do is they rest in a connection to the divine for as long as possible. So if you want to really develop true, deep psychic intuition, then you want to hold that connection to the divine for as long as possible, basically. And then I don't even think it's our intuition at that point. That's just how the divine kind of works through us.
And I think when it becomes like that, it just feels more creative.
Yeah.
And it's inspirational. It makes you like really want to do good stuff in life. And I think it's a very creative energy when intuition flows in, versus
Totally.
like this is my own experience, right? Like looking back at what you just said, like when it's a trauma trigger response, even though I might actually pick up on something also based on somebody's body language, and I might not entirely be wrong there, but it's usually more of a defense or an attack position that I would hold at such times versus a creative position, which comes from pure divine intuition.
Yeah, and people also, like they want to become more intuitive, they want to become psychic, they get really hooked on these ideas, but but I notice a lot of people are afraid of themselves. So you got to get really used to understanding your own inner world before you can start developing these psychic traits. Because if you're hiding from aspects of yourself, or you're fragmenting parts of your personalities away, you know, you can easily get all this stuff mixed up with intuition, because it's all in that realm of the unconscious. So
yeah, I want to add to that as well. So first of all, intuition is also not a feeling, right? It's a more deeper embodied knowing. It's like very neutral. But also very important, I remember what Caroline Mice said, that intuition won't, guide you to the promised land, so to speak. So people have ties into making decisions. They think, when people say, oh, my intuition was wrong, then the intuition was not wrong. It was not their intuition. But intuition doesn't prevent you actually from hardships or like struggling situations, right? Intuition is more coming from, Laura said, it's not even your own, from the soul, from the divine. It guides you towards soul evolution, what you need to learn for your soul purpose, you know? And some of these lessons can be very hard. The ego likes to resist it. It doesn't want it, right? So the intuition can actually lead you into a relationship, for example, but then all this stuff comes up in the relationship, right, with this person, all the shadow stuff, which you're like, oh my God, then you projected, oh, my partner is narcissistic and all of this, or toxic, when in fact, from a spiritual psychological perspective, needed to happen to bring all up this stuff out of the unconscious, out of your own, because it couldn't have come up by yourself. And then there's a possibility, opportunity to work through it, to make the darkness conscious, as Carl Jung said. So it's very important to understand that when you follow intuition, it doesn't necessarily mean that life is just smooth and everything you ride off to the sunset, so to speak. No, it's based on soul evolution, not necessarily what your ego or personality thinks at once.
Yeah. And intuition can tell you things that you didn't want to know too. And that's why you have to be at a certain level of development to take that information.
Yeah.
Like, who wants to know everyone's thoughts and feelings and all this stuff? A lot of us don't really have that capacity. But once we become actually more open, like, I just see intuition and any sort of kind of psychic skill as you just pick up way more information than the average person. Yeah. So you pick up all sorts of stuff, and then it gets even more subtle into the energy bodies that you're tuning into. So, but unless we're willing to know ourselves in a very deep and profound way, and our darkness, our different subpersonalities, I don't even think it's useful to go there, because, a lot of us can barely handle the different thoughts of people on Twitter. How are we going to handle their actual thoughts going on and being able to hear them? And
no, for me, like, the deeper I went into spiritual work, the more I could just plug into the collective energy, right? And then, like, every time there'd be a wave of whatever was happening collectively, I'd start feeling that, and I'd be like, what is going on? Then I was like, how do I turn this off?
Yes. So, yeah, exactly. That same thing happened for me when I was like meditating a lot, as I was just picking up way more than I wanted to know. And like, people, I think, get very like almost like hooked on like, oh, I'll become psychic, become intuitive, but you don't want to know what people are thinking.
All right. Next question is, how do we differentiate between entity attachments and dissociated selves that seem alien to our current state of being?
Oh, that's a very good question. In fact, I was in the middle of doing a video for the course of kind of going deeper, and this question always comes up in our course as well, if you remember. Right. So let me preface it as well. This whole entity topic, I've studied it and written about it for over 20 years, since the 90s. I had my own experiences and whatnot, and work with many people. Now, I've seen over the past 5 or more years, this topic of entities and so on has become way more popular in spiritual circles, New Age. And there's a lot of spiritual bypassing, because people jump the gun and blame entities for the issues, right? Yeah. And that's a big problem. I see this a lot, right? You need to become aware of the forces, but you have, if you really study the true occult teachings, the traditions, not the New Age stuff, but, even Sri Aurobindo's deeper work on occult forces, you have to have a very high level of being really connected to self and a certain soul embodiment to be able to recognize these forces directly and make that differentiation. Because I've worked with so many people also one-on-one, when they thought, when you think I have an entity, this and that, this is actually an assumption, as one of my mentors also said. Don't make assumptions. It's an assumption. It's not necessarily a fact, because the ego likes to blame externally. And what I've realized within myself as well, in my own work and working with many, many people, but when they thought that so this entity and were very sure there was an entity, it was actually not an entity. It was their own exiled self, going back to disassociated self, the exile, the inner manager,
The wounded
or
inner child.
the a trauma response, the shadow aspect that had nothing to do with entities. How entities work, also, they tag into these wounds and exaggerate them, right? It's like putting fuel into a fire, right? But they're not the cause of it. So all our shadow aspects, our inner child wounds, our traumas are entry points for these forces. So the best way to navigate this round is like, that's why all this entity removal stuff is useless in the end if the entry point is not healed, which comes down to the basic psychological inner work to retrieve our parts. Now, to the question, how can you differentiate that? It's again, it's not easy. You have to be a very high level of being to you can really make that subtle differentiation, right? I even recently read a book by Dr. William Baldwin, who is really known for his work on spirit releasement therapy, working with earthbound spirits. Earthbound spirits are the spirits of diseased human beings that get stuck in the astral realm, don't make the transition and attach on other human beings. And he in this book made also the clear differentiation. He actually introduces family systems to really understand your parts, the exile, the inner child, the inner manager, all of that, the voice of our parents, which you internalized, which are our own stuff from possible entity interferences. So in a nutshell, before we can really truly make the differentiation, you really have to know your own mind, your own psyche, know yourself, your own machine, as Gurdjieff would say, really clear about that before jumping into this whole occult realm. Because I've seen so many people jump into this occult knowledge prematurely, which can people confuse them even more, create more psychosis and paranoia and all of that. That's why I say a foundational psychological work is so important, right? You don't want to get stuck there because yes, some stuff is definitely otherworldly. Schizophrenia, for example, I have this interview with Jerry Marcinski, most likely related to other forces coming in, entity attachments. Right. So you don't want to get caught up in the psychology, in the nutshell of psychology that everything is us.
But even with schizophrenics, we've seen that it was still tagging into major unhealed trauma as well. So that's like
I think that's the opening point, right? Like when childhood trauma happens, that's when then entities kind of get a hook. That's what
you fragment, and in that fragmentation something else can enter basically. But I think that knowing your parts, this person mentioned disassociated selves. Well, if you're disassociated, then the real thing is like, how can you get yourself back to your body? How can you, psychoeducating yourself around nervous system regulation, around trauma is really a key piece, because I see that in a lot of people. It's like they're either disassociated and just really trapped in the left brain, or they're just totally somewhere else and they're just in fight. It's like you'll see a lot of people walking around who it's like they're being chased by a tiger, but nothing is happening because people are in this high state of activation all the time. So I think, doing parts work, doing work with your subpersonalities, doing trauma work will help you get there. And also shadow work, because if we exile parts of ourselves that we think are unacceptable into the shadow, they can become very gnarly and even almost demonic, similar to how an entity would present itself. So we really got to, understand these parts of ourselves and try and metabolize as much as we can of our own disowned parts before we even go down that road, because it's so easy to want to blame
someone else for the way you're
blame something. It's happening to me,
Now, another point Laura made is also very important. It's also very much emphasized in the occult traditions that a lot of what we think are entities from other realities which are there, but our own thought projections that over time have become entities themselves. We created them, right?
So much energy that we put into
thought projections and all of that. For example, I mean, what's a big issue nowadays, especially for men in this internet age, is porn addiction, right? So people who do this constantly, release themselves on the digital screen, they literally create an entity that feeds off of that sexual luge and feeds them with these desires, so they created that, so to speak. So it's that's why on the very basic level, you have to, like Laura said, like, go inside the body, calm your nervous system, right? That kind of like embodiment, because wherever we get out of body and fragment, something else can come in. but
Yeah.
the entry point needs to be healed, right? That's a key point. When we overfocus, and then that's another, Sri Aurobindo talked about as well, you need to understand the rules of the game, be aware of them, but don't over-focus on them. That's the irony as well. Like, people get so lost in this entity topic and this paranoia that draws them in even more, right? You give them more attention.
Yeah.
Having said that, on the other side of the coin, ignorance is also not a defense. So the New Age pill doesn't work there as well.
And for me, actually, the 8-hour module that you have on the occult, the hyperdimensional matrix, that's part of the course. Because see, in India, we are raised with like 3,500 different gods, right? And then you have one god for everything that you need. So
Yeah.
I think that tendency to kind of ask someone externally for help all the time, you don't know whom you're attracting. Like, they exist. It's not like these entities don't exist, right? So
Yeah.
like, for me, learning that and I realized that in the past I'd probably made certain
Trap
the
of
entire
agreement.
manifestation new age thing that happens, right? And then rituals, and then offerings and all of that. And I think when I was doing the module, like, this was before our course started. I think you'd released the 8 hours, the course, before we actually started with our actual 3-month immersive course. And then I went through that. I'm like, what have I been doing? Like, I'd done this in the past sometime. And then I remember the surge of energy just coming through me. And I actually went and threw up. And something cleared up then. Like, whatever agreements I might have made
Oh, wow.
subconsciously with some things, they just went, because myself realized that I'd done something wrong. And then I withdrew my consent from there. And it
Exactly.
was
Exactly withdraw the consent, clearing like a lot of trap of agreement. Yeah, especially I can only imagine.
India, there's like entities flying in the air all the time because people are doing these constant ceremonies. Like, I can't even...
you go to a crossroad around a full moon and a new moon, you'll always find like these lemons and like these coconuts with red stuff smeared on it. You'll find those little black voodoo dolls that are on the crossroads. I'm like, why? Like, can you just stop putting these out?
Yeah, but there's just so many entities like flying around the air because people are calling them in and like really charging them up. And not to say that all of these gods are bad or evil or whatever, but you really have to be on a high like level of psychic development to know what you're dealing with, because
because the problem is negative, the way these negative entities appear. It's not like in a Hollywood movie, like this demonic entity. No, they appear the way they're very seductive. Negative entities most often appear as positive ones, right? As Sri Aurobindo said, they take on even divine appearances, adjust to your belief system. That's why it's not to say like, then people get all afraid, oh my God, but if I call in the divine, like, no, it's about your aspiration, your inner sincerity. I go straight to the divine. I don't need no intermediaries of any gods, right? But the protection is your own inner sincerity, right? Your true aspiration. And what does it mean, sincerity and clear, pure aspiration? Means your ego is not involved. You don't contact to the divine to get any ego desires fulfilled, but just for the sake of the divine, truly surrender to him or her, the divine mother, and maybe ask for guidance. But you don't try to manifest something or impose your will into it. You surrender.
I stopped doing that, and I think that part in module 4 really helped me there, like understanding what it means to align your will and surrender it to divine will versus you trying to bend reality and manifest and like do all of these rituals. How much time do we have? Because there are so many questions, and like it's an hour.
We have a bit more time.
We're good.
We keep going,
all right. So the next question then is, how are trauma and trapped emotions related to diseases?
You mean physical diseases?
Physical disease. I think what the person meant was
definitely. That's a big elephant in the living room, as I would say. I've seen this a lot. The body, understand the body-mind connection, right? That a lot of physical diseases, especially cancers, are related to unconscious trauma or emotions we have suppressed.
So on a basic level, if you're in a state of dysregulation, your nervous system is like in a high state of anxiety or disassociation, your health is going to suffer, because it's like, you're basically have your foot on the gas pedal and the brake at the same time. So you're using all this excess energy that should be used for cleansing, for healing your body. So the nervous system regulation and dealing with the stress is so key. Like even myself, when we work too hard, like I notice my health suffers. So that's a really key part, And the trapped emotions, like I've just noticed that it creates this heaviness that goes on over time. And this is only my own personal theory based on what I've studied in Gabor Mate's work, is that if that heaviness goes on too long, it becomes the default state, which then starts to crystallize into some sort of cancer or disease, you know? So people tend to check out. Like for myself, for just as a first person example, either your group or the last group before it, there was a lot of people who were grieving and dealing with death. And I was working with them and I felt all this heaviness in myself. And it was just dragging me down. I was waking up low energy. You know, I could notice it in my basic health, you know. And so I had to clear that in order to kind of get back to a state of vitality again. So we need to be ongoingly, you know, processing our emotions, letting go of these, because if it builds up over time, never mind like 5, 10 years, 15 years, that's when I personally believe it starts to cause
and I think
problems.
that's why the body is so important, right? Because it tells you that something's off. Like
It gives you signs long before
Yeah.
it turns up into cancer. But the problem is that people are used to overriding it. We also live in a very left-brained, you know, masculinized world where it's just go, go, go all the time. We don't take time to rest and let go. So, you know, I mean, we come across people who, you know, our neighbor that time who is dealing with cancer, you know, but you can tell that she's living this high stress life and very disassociated from the body.
Or also trying to force yourself, always be happy and positive. I'm fine. And sometimes you need to allow yourself to feel a quote unquote negative emotion, allow yourself to grieve. Even anger can be difficult to process, right? You don't want to project on somebody else, but then sometimes, you know, maybe a punching bag or dancing or something else to release it, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of Gabor Mate, he has done tremendous work of really linking, even he had cases of where he linked terminal cancer to trauma and emotional suppression.
Yes.
And one of the things is what he calls the, it's a challenge, it's a triggering title, but he said, being nice will kill you. And we have seen many cancer cases.
Yeah, I'm not going to die soon, Bernhard, if being nice.
Well, the people pleaser program a lot of people have, right? Because of past trauma from childhood, they don't have ability to say no.
They're living a life that isn't even theirs.
That is not theirs. And he had this case.
I was that. I was a chronic people pleaser, right? And then I was sick. I was 97 kgs, and then I had like an autoimmune condition and all of that. My body was just destroying itself because I was not doing what I was designed to do.
Because it's on a metaphysical level, it's a betrayal to your soul. What it means on the outer personality, traumatized in order to receive love, you know, and attention and appreciation, needs to say yes to everybody and please everyone. But it goes against the deeper soul purpose and lesson and like a kind of drive, what the soul really wants to know and the inner child has been denied to do, right? It relates to internalized shame. So there's a friction between the outer and the inner. And that then affects also the physical body in the long term.
What I also realized through the course is as I processed some of my past trauma and as I released it, I actually got sick again, but it was temporary. It was just part of like releasing stuff that was held in my body for so long, and like my body was just asking for rest, and I like needed to take time off work and just like let my body resolve that trauma. So sometimes people like when they come to us also. And like people think that they were doing okay, and then suddenly why did they get sick? And sometimes it's just your body letting go of stuff. So
that's normal. Yes,
it's called a healing crisis.
Yes, I have experienced that myself. It's not a virus.
Yeah, that's what. Even if I get like really deep tissue massage for the first time in a while, I'll also get sick the day after, or feel sick because it's like everything comes to surface.
Exactly.
So yeah, I see those things as a good sign.
All right. How is the karmic situation related to what we are manifesting in the body? I think that's more to do with like your past karma and your karma of this life.
Well, yeah, like I mean, karma gets trapped in the body of the form of unprocessed emotions. Even the family that you incarnate into is a product of already in motion karma. So your body that you chose is a product of already continuing karma from past lives, all of it. That's how I feel. And how is the karmic situation manifesting in the body? Well, everything that you're carrying, all of your history, your thoughts, emotions, stuff that you're maybe not aware of is all coming up in the body. Like I've even focused on, on my meditation retreats, chronic tension in my body, and then found out it was related to stuff that happened to my ancestors. It's really profound. So the body is like a holding tank of karma, basically. So if we want to deal with our karma, we have to, this is my own philosophy. I've learned somatic meditation from Reggie Ray. We have to process these emotions in the body.
Yeah, in other words, you don't need past life regression to figure out your past lives to access past. It's all stored in the body.
Yes.
And Laura's right that on that note, it's also important to note a lot of stuff we're dealing with is not necessarily just all related to childhood or what mom and dad did to us, but it's reactivated from past life. A lot of stuff that comes up for me in my own personal journey in healing is definitely past life related, but it manifests also in this life and be accessed through the body.
Yeah, for me, I think when Laura did the evolutionary astrology reading, a lot of the past life patterns that came up, the betrayal trauma that was carried forward, showed up in this chart, in this lifetime's chart, and then it was actually coming up as a pattern for clearing itself, right? And the minute you actually brought that to my knowledge, so the ignorance about it disappeared and it became knowledge. The pattern disappeared. So that's really phenomenal, right? Because I think I don't remember which part of the chart was telling me that, but you highlighted like the betrayal trauma mostly from the masculine and the male wounding, and then like you had asked me if it kind of had something to do with my childhood and how my father was present for me or absent for me, and just talking about it kind of made a change. And then from there, like whatever betrayal like might have happened from men in my life, it's just stopped. It's not happened since then, right? So
because with the betrayal wound in particular, that's definitely like a Scorpio 8th house thing, is that the issue is we start to self-betray and we stop listening to our own instincts and intuitions, and we stop standing up for ourselves, making boundaries, saying what we want. And that becomes the ongoing problem. So it's no longer an issue of like people betraying, but us betraying ourselves. Yes. So that also puts the power back on ourselves. So if we experience, a lot of people who experience betrayal experiences, they usually had signs that something was going to happen all along, but they didn't listen. They didn't speak up for themselves. So the self-betrayal was really the piece to deal with. So yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, what's next? The next question is about traumas of this lifetime. I think we just covered that. When we are healing, how are we saving the coming generations through changes in genes and DNA?
I don't know about the genes and DNA. I think that goes into like epigenetics, but I do think that a lot of our parents' generation didn't really basically there was a lot of child abuse that happened. And it was because it was woven into the culture, like children are to be seen but not heard. It's okay to hit your children, to show them boundaries. We had all of these ways that weren't actually good for the human experience, that were kind of the traditional child rearing practices. So I think that we're actually doing a lot of healing that our parents couldn't heal, that our grandparents couldn't heal. Sorry, honey, can I just, is this, so, that's kind of what we're like, I'm undoing patterns that happened to my grandparents, that happened to my parents, and I'm just I'm not taking the template that I got from my parental situation as the way that I want to live my life. I'm literally designing a new way of living. So for a lot of us, if we didn't grow up with secure attachment or a really loving family, we're literally just reinventing our lives and how we want to be based on this new level of consciousness. So your healing and all the new patterns that you weave will be passed down to the children after you. So it's like you can see it in a more practical term rather than
because you're doing it with more conscious awareness, you're going to change patterns, right? Like it doesn't even have to be
exactly. I mean, I can share. So for my example, in my parents, my dad escaped Eastern Germany, communist Eastern Germany. My mom escaped communist Poland, so they met in a refugee camp. It's a very different upbringing, right? Based on physical survival, so they didn't have time to do trauma work, emotional, whatever work, right?
Yeah,
it wasn't even known back then. But in my own inner process, I've also because they had out of survival, my dad was born at the beginning of World War II in the middle of war. So there's a lot of trauma. My dad was also imprisoned in Eastern Germany and trying to escape. So there's a lot of trauma my parents suppressed out of necessity, right? They're not able to process it. It's like a healthy function, by the way, to suppress trauma. But then it gets stored, it stays. And I realize in my own process, I've taken that on as well. A lot of stuff I'm dealing with is because their own unprocessed trauma is transferred onto me.
Yeah.
When you grow up as a child, you also become very sensitive to the energy of your parents.
Their nervous system.
So you take that on as well. So hence, when I work on myself, there's also this generational guilt of the German collective that I had to work through myself as well. So when we process that, then we also automatically heal our parents, our ancestors. I've seen this actually seen in real life with my parents. I have a much deeper emotional connection. My dad has finally opened up, so it heals my relationship as well, working on myself. And they will obviously, as the question goes, also affect future generations. So we don't have, to carry on in the samsara, wheel of samsara, continuously generational trauma over trauma and over trauma. So that's why it's true that saying, heal myself, I heal the world. I mean, as cheesy as it sounds, but there's truth in this. And topic. That's why, again, you do way more better for the world if you really work truly on your own self and heal yourself, rather than donating $2 million to some, I don't know, philanthropy, or trying to do activism or something like that. I'm not saying that this shouldn't be done as well, but the inner work is so key, because everything is one, right? It has ripple effects on multidimensional levels.
So for me, the same thing happened. Like the minute the betrayal thing, just the pattern resolved, my relationship with my dad became so much better, because I could see he was just a product of his conditioning and his belief systems, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah,
I don't have any angst or any anger left against him anymore. The other thing that came up during our course, I think towards the end is, and I think this was also as I was starting to do work with Leanne, a lot of the stuff that I was carrying was also my mom, my grandmom's inability to stand up to the patriarchy that's so prevalent in India, right? Because their lives were like entirely going with like society's model of how women should be. And as I started working on that and releasing a lot of that, then that anger against patriarchy also started going off. But it didn't end there. Then I started seeing them in my dreams. And like, not just my mom. My mom's passed a long time ago. So my mom, my grandmom, a big lineage of all the matriarchs from my family, right? They just started visiting me in my dreams. And I'm like, I don't even know these people. Why are they coming here? And it just felt like I was receiving blessings from them for doing this work of healing the trauma that they experienced as women, right? That they couldn't actualize their creative potential, and I carried it in my bloodline. It came to me, and then like I worked on it, and at an energetic level, I think they experience the work as well, and
Yeah,
then
but
that
that's also,
translates.
their suffering wasn't for nothing, too.
Yes.
If someone eventually learns the lesson in your ancestry, then their suffering isn't just, for no reason. It's because you're meant to you're like a cycle breaker. And I think a lot of us are doing that, because even if you look at trauma theory and what we know about childhood development and attachment, this stuff wasn't around 50 years ago, It's actually up to us to learn these things to kind of undo these patterns. But then also, it's very tempting to want to blame your parents, but they didn't know any better, actually. In fact, these tools weren't even available to them then. So,
but trauma wasn't even the deeper trauma, somatic work, not available.
There was no trauma.
80s and 90s, right?
Yeah, and even Alice Miller, who wrote this amazing book, Drama, The Gifted Child. I think she wrote it in the 60s or 70s, maybe. I don't know. It's been out for a while.
Later, yeah. But
she was ridiculed when she suggested that the way that we were parenting and child rearing was causing childhood trauma. She was really the people who are the trailblazers in this arena were ridiculed by modern psychology, and now we're starting to adopt it. So we're at this real cutting edge of our understanding of mental illness, of illness in general, of health, and our parents simply didn't have it available. They actually tended to trust the science and the system so much that it actually ended up causing harm. I can't tell you how many parents who were probably told to just let their children cry it out, otherwise they would be spoiled, you know.
I did
you
the
were
entire sleep training thing for my daughter when she was 13 or 14 months old. And
Yeah,
that's not a practice in India. In India, you actually sleep with your baby until your baby is ready to wean off. And then
yeah,
I read all of these books influenced by the Western culture with all of these
Mm.
like I wasn't so much into like learning more about the psyche. I was just looking at like mainstream books.
yeah,
And then I did that entire sleep training thing, which I think has deeply traumatized my daughter. Because like she just had to learn to self-soothe herself and cry and like just go to sleep and like figure out ways to just calm herself down. And I like now looking back, I'm like, what the fuck should I do? Like, why did I
yeah.
even do that? Right? Like,
And
it's
for
so
a baby, that's terrifying. And then that creates an adult who learns how to suppress their emotions immediately because that was trained into them as children. So
yeah.
we have a lot of this like mainstream advice, which needs like, I mean, a lot of it needs to literally go out the window. I think we're in this huge paradigm shift of
Well,
health.
it's happening right now with the debunking of linking chemical imbalance in the brain
Yeah,
to depression.
the entire
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
depression is a chemical imbalance theory. And I think something else about Alzheimer's came out as well last week.
Yeah.
I can't remember what that study was. I've saved it to read it later. But yeah, I think
Hmm.
people are understanding the brain a little better now. Um,
Yes.
okay, this is an interesting question. How do one-sided karmic bonds work if one party wants to keep the connection in the next lifetime, but the other party does not want the
Okay. So,
what happens? Will that
so
karmic bond still remain in future lives?
okay, so
So-
this person like just broke up with their boyfriend. I'm sorry.
Oh, girlfriend.
Or girlfriend or something, you know. I don't know, you know, one-sided karmic bonds, you know. Ultimately, if someone doesn't want anything to do with you, it's probably best to move on and to understand what kind of attachment patterns
Yeah.
would lead you to want to stay connected to someone who doesn't want anything to do with you. But I think
I
that
think the person who
unless we learn the lesson with that person or circumstance, there's not going to be, you know, but you may not encounter that exact same soul in another lifetime. It might be a different person, so you can't
So, for a little
guarantee.
context to the question, the person who asked this question is has someone in their lives who is extremely dependent for support, and the person doesn't mind doing that in this lifetime, but the other
Mhm.
Mhm.
person keeps saying that, oh, like you're such a good friend or whatever to have, like I want to be with you lifetime after lifetime so that I have your support.
Ah.
And this person is like, I
Oh,
don't want to do this again, right? Like I'm doing this now.
yes,
So I think
yeah.
that's the context of the question.
Well, I think on that note, karma is very just oversimplified because karma, I think, is very complex. It's not just one-to-one thing, right? I mean, so
Right.
that's just as a foundation. Like we need to understand that karma is very more complex. Even what we call karmic relationships, you know, it goes way beyond the mind. But ultimately, you know, in this, I mean, in this context, you know, it's all about the individuation process, so to
Yes.
speak, you know. And sometimes I can see it in certain relationships because we are so well-meaning and giving, we can actually inhibit somebody's individuation process, soul evolution, because we do everything for them, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes, like even like a child, sometimes the child needs to fall in order to learn how to walk. You cannot always, you know, cater along with it. And similar in our evolutionary perspective, that's why the divine or God or whatever divine grace will not always bail us out because or we won't be saved. There's no Jesus coming to save us. There's no aliens coming to save us. There's no gods. No one is going to save us.
There's
They're
no
divine
mothership.
assisting.
Yeah.
No galactic federation of light. They're assisting forces definitely positive that assist us and help us and guide us, but they're not doing the work for us. You know, I've seen this many times. You know, even had a really intense relationship breakup over 10 years ago, and it was really hard. I had to stay in a hotel and all of that. And then I was praying for divine guidance and help. And what the help came literally in this book that was there in the coffee shop. I talked about this in our last podcast, which was about relationships, how to be an adult in a relationship. That was the divine grace. And it helped me so much. But I needed to take a stronger look into the mirror and work on myself. So that's what I'm saying. Like when we say help another person, where's it coming from? Right? Do we really truly help us? And sometimes saying no, and for the person to learn him or her own lessons, you know, to become more quote unquote independent themselves is the better lesson.
And if this person is helping someone and they're becoming dependent on them, then the best thing they can do in their work is to encourage autonomy at certain phases, because that can happen in lots of therapeutic relationships, but the best therapist will eventually encourage your autonomy. So they'll make you step into that adult self, basically.
Yeah.
Thanks. How does one work on the following? That's hatred, forgiveness, regret. So these emotions that are not nice emotions, like hatred or
hatred is a very strong emotion.
Yeah, hatred's pretty intense, but just in general, if you can learn this process of disidentification, which means allowing yourself to experience emotions without identifying with them, that's definitely a key practice, so that you can be with your hatred without becoming it. Because I think, especially if you're a trauma survivor, a lot of anger and rage will need to come out in order to get you back into your body again. So disidentification, can I allow myself to experience this emotion without identifying it or without becoming it, is key. Forgiveness is kind of a weird one, because I think that if you learn the lesson of an experience, even particularly negative or difficult experiences, you will not need to forgive, because you'll see why you had to go through that.
Yes.
And there's a real, almost like you just trust life and trust reality. So there's nothing wrong with reality. In fact, everything that happens to you was specifically designed for you and your own karmic situation.
Yeah, that's a good
point.
Like,
even I've had, very narcissistic relationships in my past, all sorts of abuse. I've not forgiven any of them, because I've learned a lesson from it. Doesn't mean I like them and I just all love and light and you guys are my gurus. No. I learned the lesson, but I don't need to forgive them for it, because nothing wrong happened as far as my own soul lessons.
I think
I'm never forgiving Bill Gates ever.
Forgive yourself and others. People talk about this Christian values and if we need to forgive. Sometimes there can be premature forgiveness when we need to actually experience certain emotions.
Yeah.
So it's become intellectual concept. But Laura hit at the ultimate truth. When you really go deep into the work and connect to soul and yourself and understand really on a deeper level, you realize that there's nothing to forgive to begin with, right? Because all these are lessons.
I think that forgiveness, like I tried that as well with the trauma that happened to me, right? Like just love and light and forgive and everything. And it didn't work. Like I'd be sitting and meditating and then some anger would just come up, right? And then I'm like, why is this situation not forgiven? And then through the course, as I started working more with my body and I started doing that, like as things got released, as energy and thoughts and emotions, as they were processed, how they should have been processed at first, as perspective shifted for me, then thinking of the person or the situation doesn't make me angry anymore, right? So there's like, I understand what you're saying, Laura, about the need to forgive.
Yeah, and also instead of forgiveness, this is like an interpersonal thing, like go for repair. So like if Bernhard and I have a conflict, if I say something in a way that I didn't mean to say it or vice versa, we have to come together and talk it out and repair the situation after until we kind of restore the connection. So if it's someone that you're currently in a relationship with, don't just forgive, like find a way that you guys can talk about it and repair the situation.
So you can really learn from it.
Because that will help you develop intimacy in the relationship.
Yeah. And the last one.
I love the last module that you had on relationships and conscious relationships. Because, really great.
Yeah, that's another, on that note, because, relationships is, in this day and age is very challenging for a lot of people what's coming up. Because I also feel one of the reasons it's challenging is interesting is a lot of single people, even though we're connected on the internet, but more single people. I think a lot of the reason is also because there's a rising of conscious. People are becoming more aware and are reluctant to jump into relationships, or they choose relationship for the wrong reasons. And people have no guidance or knowledge. People like Laura always says, people want this great relationship, the perfect partner, but they then take the time to really learn about themselves, do the inner work, understanding the relationship psychology, what they truly want, how their unconscious stuff actually affects the attraction towards certain people, right? There's still the idea of blaming, still looking for this idealized partner and whatnot. So there needs to be a deep dive into understanding evolutionary relationships.
And I think with relationships, the psychological work becomes so important, right? Like I see a lot of people even in India who are looking for spiritual partners, without doing deep psychological work on themselves and really understand what is it like. It's so important to get into your own psyche and like
Yeah.
understand what is it that you're looking for when there's a partner, because in the end that relationship becomes a container for your gunk to come out. Like that's going to happen no matter what happens, right? Your stuff.
Don't you guys always have also some like arranged marriages based on your Vedic
Oh,
Do they
astrology
still
and
do
all of
that
that?
in
yeah,
India?
that still
Oh,
happens.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's happening. My team, like the average, if you take me and Avinash out of the team, the average age of my team is like 21 years. That's
Mm.
39 people. They're all young people. And then like there are still people within the team whose parents are setting up marriages for them, right? So
Um,
Like with a dowry and everything, and
dowry isn't such a
okay.
big part of the picture anymore, but it's more to do with like the caste and the religion, and then
Oh,
like
really? Wow.
yeah, the
That
economic
can be
status.
very dangerous, actually, to
It
do this.
is. And what happens is society here is like really fucked up. So you aren't really allowed to be an individual as much as you have to conform to consensus society, right? So even wanting to walk out of a marriage is really, really hard for most people, right? Like, okay, you made a
Mm.
mistake. So people don't date enough. They don't even like understand what is it that they really want, especially the ones that are primed for the arranged marriage from a young age. Like the girls and the
Yeah.
boys were told that okay, we're gonna choose your partner for you. So they don't
mm,
even like go through the entire dating process. They don't even
Yeah.
know what they want, and then like their parents pick somebody for them, and they're like, okay, this is like the perfect fit because then I'm gonna be the good son, good daughter, or whatever.
Hmm.
And the marriage like is not going to be what's designed. Like I'm sure
yeah.
it's designed for the soul's evolution, but there's so much pain and there's so much
Mm,
repression and there's so much just like going with okay, now it's time to produce a child and now it's time to figure out
yeah.
education and it's all of that, and
Yes.
then it's painful to watch.
Yeah.
But each soul's journey is their own, so you can't interfere and you can't.
Yeah, and even countries have their own soul evolution too.
Yeah,
You know, countries have their own karma as well. And I think that India has been dealing with a lot of this, like, getting rid of, I mean, you kind of have this weird mixture of like the British and the Indian kind of merging
yeah,
together, but you can see these major culture clashes between them.
Yeah.
So I think that India is in its massive transformation itself too.
you had once spoken about the US being in its Pluto
Return.
transition. Each
Yeah,
country
yeah.
goes through that as well, is it? Like each country has
Yeah.
its own
Yeah,
evolutionary.
each country has its own astrology chart. It has its own evolution, it has its own, destiny, I guess you could
Wow.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I still
And
like
on the,
being back
I was
here.
gonna,
Though. Yeah,
I was gonna point the third point, regret, because that ties into that.
yeah,
Regret. I've worked on that because I realize I've no regret whatsoever, because even when I look in the past, the way when I say people say regret, I wish I would have done this and that. Well, hindsight is also always 2020, as the saying goes. We have a better perception, right? But the way I see it, any decision you've made in the past, you did to the best of your ability based on the level of awareness and
yeah,
consciousness you were at, right? So this is what you acknowledge. So that goes back to forgiveness of self, actually, right? So, and also my philosophy is always are lessons, even when I do the decision looking back, okay, there was not the quote right. Who says what's a right and wrong decision anyway? That's a whole other topic coming from the ego perspective, right or wrong, what the personality likes or the soul, right?
Mhm.
So, that's whole idea of right and wrong sometimes, which was a very, what I thought, devastating decision I made, was a very important soul lesson I needed to go through, even though it resulted in hardship and suffering. I needed to go through it, right, to learn a very deep lesson. And that kind of got me to a place where I'm in a much more integrated place, rather than always playing it safe and doing the quote unquote right
yeah.
decision. So regret, the question is, where's the question coming from? Is the ego asking these questions, or for me, my philosophy is all these are lessons, right? And and learn from any situation.
I think also regret could be linked to guilt as well, you know, and I think there's a healthy aspect of guilt and there's a very toxic aspect of guilt where you're just beating yourself up for things that aren't even your responsibility.
Yeah.
But, you know, guilt is actually a healthy function of conscience when it's operating, you know, in the way it's supposed to. But for many people, they actually beat themselves up, which have nothing to do with anything that's their fault or anything that they did wrong, you know. So it's about understanding our relationship to guilt as well.
Yep. And I think a lot of guilt programming happens, like childhood control is guilt and shame, right? Like that's primarily the
Yeah.
program that parents, all
Yeah.
authority figures use. So many people have
Toxic shame too is the affect of the inner critic. So if we have a really strong inner critic, you know, which we usually developed as a survival mechanism in childhood, we are going to be feeling guilt and shame all the time for the littlest things and stuff that isn't even our fault to begin with. So it is about also challenging or maybe even just getting to know that part of you so that that's not running your internal reality. Because I know a lot of people who struggle with this kind of self-shaming all the time. And that is a trauma response too.
Yeah, I've had a lot of shame going on, not so much guilt, but shame was always something that was with me for so long. And then, like, it's taken a lot of work to undo that. And that shame would always bring that I'm not good enough feeling. And then, like, I would overcompensate to kind of deal with that shame.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How to reduce our karmic balance and be free?
Become enlightened and do service to others for the rest of your life. Go to Ganesh and give him some offerings. I don't know. I think ultimately finding your soul purpose and finding a way that you can be of service to humanity is probably the best way to deal with your karma. So like I am, even in my own work, I'm constantly looking for ways that I can be of service to others in ways that aren't being asked of me, even if it's just replying on social media for a little bit or helping someone out. I'm constantly looking for opportunities to do that because I do think that service to others is the accelerated path of clearing karma.
Yes.
But it has to come from your own heart and your own self. You can't be doing it because you think you're going to get something out of it. That's
the ego likes to hijack it.
Yeah.
Don't do things. Oh, this is going to get good karma. For
Yeah.
You have to
million
like
people to heal. Like I'm going to be free of my karmic balance, right? So
exactly that already.
Yeah, it came from that place. Now it's different now for me. I can feel it too. Like for me, I just feel like every day that I exist, I shouldn't really be creating anything that's going to hold me down, and I should just be like letting energy pass through me and like just give people how much ever I can give, right, without depleting myself.
yes,
That
exactly.
feels like a way to live without creating too much karma and like being free because I can go to bed really easy. Uh, like that's a sign for me. Like okay, I probably don't have too much karma building up, and I'm kind of free.
Yeah, and
So
also karma, just always keep in mind, it's just law of cause and effect. It's just the universe rebalancing itself. You know what I mean? Like even the idea of good or bad karma is judgments of the ego from the higher perspective. It's just, there's no judgment, right? It's just law of cause and effect.
Yeah. I do think that doing good deeds as much as possible from a pure heart is probably the best way to work with it and will make your life easier. So if you can find little opportunities to do good deeds for other people, when you feel like you have the overflow, like don't do it from this martyrdom thing, I personally feel that will make your life much easier in the long term. And you just feel better.
Yeah. Your body is a great way to know that, right? Like whether you're depleting yourself or whether like your body will tell you like if your energy is in the right place, you know you're doing right by yourself.
Totally,
Absolutely, yes.
It's effortless. It becomes effortless. You're not doing it because your super ego is like, I should do this because of karma. You're doing it because you genuinely feel the call to help someone.
That's a good point too. Not getting this shit out of your mind. It's like again the inner work. The more we're connected to essence, our true self, to the divine, we naturally will be no more engaged in conscious action. Then naturally we will reduce our karmic debt, so to speak, because we are more in alignment.
Yes.
For someone who is new to this, how do we validate or check if we are on the right path?
how
You
do
have to
we
get
know?
cancelled at least once.
Do you
Like,
feel inspired? Do you feel vibrant? Do you feel like full of energy? Do you feel like your life has meaning? You know, all of these are signs usually that you're on the
And
right
your
track.
relationships, the outside world, don't forget,
Yes.
as above, so below, as within, so without, as one of the universal laws hermetic principles say. Your relationships are also a mirror of your internal world, the way you
that's a
relate.
beautiful point, Bernhard. Like,
You know, so that's kind of like the way even people say with even intimate relationships, people say, I want this partner, like, you know, most of us have no conscious control of who we attracted to and who we attract, because it happens on multidimensional unconscious levels. And our partners or relationships, not only intimate, but friends, people we surround ourselves, are also a reflection of how we treat ourselves.
Yes.
and I mean, I can attest to that, right? Like, the first 37, 38 years of my life, I had to bend over backwards. I had to like really overcompensate to just have people in my life, whether it was money or time or energy. I just have to do a lot just to keep people in my life. And then now I have this beautiful team, I have this beautiful community, and they just come and become part of my life, right? And like, it's out of mutual respect. There's a lot of love and care and like authenticity, and like, it's just so beautiful to have these people. So I feel so good and I feel just so well taken care of that these people are there. I
So
think
what
this is
changed in you? What changed in you that allowed those relationships to come forward?
so I went to this entire, so this was when I was 37, is when I realized I was living a completely fake life, right? Like, the one designed by society. And I just had enough of it. Like, I felt a very deep call from my soul that like something was really wrong and I couldn't do this anymore. So suicide ideation, depression, all of that happened. And I needed to kind of build a lot of courage to walk out of the marriage that I was in, come back to India, rebuild my life from scratch. And then it wasn't easy. Even now, I learn a lot of lessons around boundaries and what's really important for me. But the more I started working on myself, the more I started saying that, okay, if I'm alive for a purpose. What is that purpose, right? So the more I asked that question, and the more I said that, like, I am not going to deny myself what is important for me. Like, I'm never going to kill myself for something else. It was literally that in my mind, right? So externally, a lot of things were happening. Thrive happened, and like clients happened. I learned functional medicine. I worked on my health, but those were the actions. What really happened was the mindset that switched inside. Like,
So
it
it's
was like,
almost like you decided you wanted to live like an authentic life,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. The
Yeah,
authenticity
yeah.
kicked
Yeah.
in,
That's
right?
a key
And
thing.
before that authenticity came in, you also had to go through the disillusionment process. You were living a lie.
You had to reality check
Right,
yourself to where
exactly.
you were at. Yeah. That's a super
That's a key
important
point.
step. That's one that I actually don't
and,
see a
and
lot
it
of
didn't
people
end at
miss.
just 37, right? So 37 was one big reality check. And then life
Yeah.
changed. And then, like, as the journey is continued, I keep getting different reality checks,
Yeah.
because that's where growth happens, right? Otherwise, I would have still been stagnant. So it's not like, oh, it all just happened 1 year when I was 37 and now my life
Yeah.
is sorted.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's continuing.
it still happens, but it's mostly happening through the work I do, right? Like, whatever I experience, uh, the people I bring on board on the team, the people I engage with, the kind of clients we get, the kind of interaction sometimes we have with some of our clients, most of the inner work now happens. So like Laura had once said, the business is a front for my spiritual inner work. It's really happening through the business, maybe because I decided that like this was one way to kind of take care of myself financially and ensure that I'm stable. Like, the business, as long as it's there, I can like provide for myself and I don't have to really depend on anyone else. So the business is like my center point right now, and then everything else, right, all other dimensions kind of reflect back to me, like whether it's the relationship I'm in with my partner and we are working on the business together. So whatever happened between us, like whatever we had to deal with in terms of our relationship crisis, which I think every relationship might experience to different scales, right? So that then, because both of us were so repair oriented and we kind of worked on repairing whatever went wrong, it
Yeah.
strengthened the business. And like, now the business is really growing into another dimension, right? So
Beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah, the repair is really key, like in
Yeah.
maintaining a solid relationship over time. Like everything needs to be addressed, you know,
And I
like,
think that's what healing is, right? Like you're just repairing things that break in
yeah,
different
and we
ways.
all have our old patterns and old
Yeah.
ways of relating, which are not useful for the kind of relationship we want. And we're always going to make mistakes
Yeah.
and do things wrong. But the repair allows us to be human and to do a
Yeah.
do-over. And in the repair, that's when the true intimacy is built, because we
Yeah.
know that whatever we go through with the person, we can come together and we can work this out. And that's what
And
creates
it's
trust.
made us stronger, right? So I like when someone asked this question about regret, I was on a flight this weekend. I'd gone, I traveled for work. So when I left Pune and I went, no one asked about masks, and like in India, no one really cares about masks and your vaccine certificates anymore, right? No one's asking about it in most
Mm,
places. So when I boarded the flight from here and I went off into this other city, I just checked in, boarded, and that was it. And when I was coming back and I entered the flight, and this flight attendant was like, "Ma'am, please wear your mask." I didn't even have a mask with me. And then like I sat, and then she came handing out one of those dirty blue surgical masks, and she's like, "Wear it." And I'm like, did I just go back into the past? Like, what happened here? Like, this doesn't feel like this month right now. It feels like a year ago. And then I was
mm,
just sitting in the flight and contemplate. And I don't know why this happens to me on flights. Maybe because I get so ungrounded when we go off into that air. I go into another space in my head. And I just
mm,
went into this deep meditative space. I was like, okay, let's imagine that I've actually come back into the past and I land in Pune and it's like last year. What would I change? And I looked
mm,
at the entire year and whatever trauma I had experienced and everything. And I didn't really want to change a thing, like not one
mm,
thing, because everything from there taught me so much and made things so much stronger. And like if I wouldn't have found your course, right? If things had changed, and then I wouldn't have learned so many tools, and then I wouldn't have created this thing called embracing the human. Like it's just like there is no space for regret, really. Like everything that happened served a
Yeah.
purpose. So you
yes.
like if you're in this timeline, if you're the one thinking about what you want to change, you don't want that change because you wouldn't be you then. That's another person, another
And
timeline. I
also
think.
then, instills a deeper trust in life and trust in the divine. That's
Yeah,
a lot of people are missing is faith and trust.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
posted this quote by Joseph Campbell the other day on Facebook and Telegram, and it was and he basically is talking about this Nietzsche quote. So this is, I think it's like Amor de Fati or something. I'm totally butchering that, but it's basically like trust your fate,
Hmm.
which means that trust everything that happens to you is specifically designed for your own, soul evolution, awakening,
Yeah,
whatever you want to call it, and we have to eventually, when we do self-work, we actually have to learn how to trust reality completely, and that
yeah,
every challenge that we're presented with was designed specifically for us. That's why it's happening.
And requires self-responsibility, which
yeah,
is not
and
easy, right?
yeah, and then the work you do, then the actions that you take really creates your evolution. One
Yeah.
last question is, what are your thoughts on psychedelics?
Yeah,
Well, and
yeah,
yeah, go on.
yeah, I mean, I don't really use, I did a lot of ayahuasca when I was processing a lot of sexual trauma that I suppressed. It really helped me, actually. It helped bring stuff to surface. I don't see them as a cure-all. I
Hmm.
think they have a lot of benefits for mental health that far surpass what we have already in this, like, psychiatric drug, like, whole industry. But they're not a cure-all. They're best actually when done in accompaniment with deep psychological and
Absolutely.
spiritual work, because I see a lot of people get caught in kind of the medicine circle environment, and they don't actually know how to work with their shadow or triggers. They don't have these basic tools, and I think that's what I was looking for when I was doing lots of ayahuasca, as I was like thinking that, oh, I just drink this medicine and all my trauma will go away. But no, we bump up against our own trauma in a relationship. So they can definitely help, especially if you have, very suppressed experiences that might only be unlocked if you kind of get a bit of an ego loss, but they don't fix everything. And yeah, the integration work, I think, is key.
Is is is
But I think
important.
there's a lot of promise. Like, we definitely experiment with microdosing, I think that psilocybin has great promise for helping with depression. It's far better than anything else we have out there. But I think that people need to be mindful especially if they're more, fragmented and disassociated. I've seen people lose it doing too much medicine as well. So there's risks as well, but I would say the benefits seem to be higher than the risks.
Yeah, for me.
I don't necessarily agree with the last statement. I've been a psychonaut. I've worked heavily in the 90s or 2000s with mushrooms. Like I got deep into trance McKenna, taking 8-9 grams.
Wow, Bernhard, that's really
by myself, locking myself in the room. Like I didn't even use it at parties anymore. I just wanted to explore. Right, high doses of acid. I've probably smoked DMT over 20, 30 times. So really, exploring, and was just fascinated.
Yeah.
I spent time in the Amazon with Shipibo tribe and did ayahuasca and all of that. So partly I can see how this helped me. Laura mentioned, with trauma, because even there are scientific studies that psilocybin helps to restructure your brain. But it needs to be integrated with other work as well. And I went too far. And, I've written a few articles. I've worked with people myself. You can actually take on and get entity attachments by forcing you, especially high doses of blowing up your conscience with psychedelics. There's a lot of black shamanism, black magic happening as well in Peru or in the Amazon, right? With ayahuasca, where I've worked with people, the shaman or sorcerer installed an entity with somebody, with the group that they were doing ayahuasca. So there's definitely the dark side, which I don't want to instill fear, but it's being very much neglected.
Yeah, I think when it comes
there's
to
this romanticizing of psychedelics and ayahuasca and shamanism. And true shamanism, by the way, people don't understand. I've written an article about this on my website. It has nothing to do with psychedelics or medicine plants. They actually got introduced later, when the shamans were become, in a nutshell, lazy and didn't, were able to access these altered states by themselves through shamanic drumming or breathwork or whatever. And then, these plants, it's easier access. But with that come other dangers, because you are entering other realms with other beings and entities. And if you don't know how to navigate this, even ayahuasca, I step away from it. I've also worked with Achuma, San Pedro, and had great experiences and even hosted ceremonies. But for me, these are tools and crutches. At some point, you need to lay it away. If somebody tells me, I've done 50, 60 ayahuasca ceremonies, that's a red flag for me, right? You need maybe only 1 or 2, and that's it, and then do the work.
Yeah, and right? I also think that basically what psychedelics provide is almost this synthetic peak experience that gets us out of our limited
and a lot of people get addicted to that experience, because real life 3D is really hard.
Yeah, but I've personally, I think peak experiences are very important because they can kind of inform our more spiritual work. They can show us what else is out there besides our limited kind of egoic experience. But I have found the more profound ones actually happen through meditation, through yoga, through self-work. Those ones seem to be more accessible for me in my consciousness. Whereas if I have this profound experience in ayahuasca, it's almost like the synthetic nature of creating it makes it less accessible for me in everyday life. Yeah. So if it happened to me sober, I have easier access to it later on, basically.
Because you did it internally.
Exactly, because it happened in a sober state.
And then you know how to go back to it, whenever you need it, right? Like when you're using tools like meditation and breathwork and music, you don't need a synthetic molecule to do it. For me, the first break, right? When I was 37, so that was an acid trip that really induced and that showed me the reality I was living in versus. So I'm a fan of psychedelics because for me they've been turning points, but then you have to be very careful. So I tell people that you need do it in the right setting, do it with somebody who kind of can navigate you if you get into the fear and paranoia zone. You need someone to kind of guide you, right? Because you're literally going on a journey that is uncharted terrain, and you want to be careful, you want to protect yourself. So
and also
I think that's the cutting edge is if we can get really skilled therapists to work with these in a therapeutic context, that could be a game changer because we're having a major mental health crisis in the US. 50% of people are on psychiatric drugs. We have huge issues mentally and spiritually and emotionally going on, and even in India, worldwide. So we have to think of better solutions. And I think in many ways, psychedelics can basically accelerate the therapeutic process. But since they have the high possibility for fragmentation, possible entity attachment, they can create psychosis. Is like, it's just something that the average person does not have the psychological strength to navigate. You have a spiritual crisis and you get all wonky. Like that happened to me after I did ayahuasca. You have to have almost like the ego strength to navigate that without losing your mind and ending up in a psych ward.
Yeah, that's the key point. I mean, honestly, I also want to, because sometimes I've seen these quote unquote medicine plants being so hyped. Don't believe the hype. Don't do it just because others doing. It's deep in the call. It's like there's a line. You don't have to do it. Number one, and number two, don't fool yourself that you think it's a magic pill.
Yeah,
right.
Not.
Sometimes it can open up.
I think the real work is post the integration, right? Like the 6 months, the year that goes after that, into like just integrating everything that got unlocked in your psyche,
and preparing for it too. Like when I was doing lots of ceremonies, the people who had the worst time were people who I could tell never did yoga, never did meditation, never didn't take care of their body, were probably just drinking the day before. So you want to actually prepare your vessel as much as possible before you do that.
Yeah, not already meditation techniques, breath, know their self, have a certain amount of self work done already, understand shadow work, and all of that before diving into that realm.
Yeah, I think because we are in this kind of instant gratification culture still, where we think that, this thing will just fix everything, or this psychedelic or whatever. And we have to, because the more lasting work is more subtle, and you don't even notice that it's actually happening until like 3 years later. You're like, well, I'm in a way different place than I was before. And so it's not just this overnight, you do an ayahuasca ceremony and then all of a sudden you're in this twin flame relationship and you're a millionaire. Like that's not how it works.
Like you have to do the work after that, right? You just can't go back to your old life and then try to integrate with that. And that's where you lose, like you start losing your mind, because you then have to build the courage to kind of act on whatever knowledge came through, whatever consciousness got altered, like even if it's your higher self kind of directing you. If you lack that courage, if you've not built up that courage to work on the lessons that come in a peak experience, that's when people kind of, like, that's what I've actually seen. Like when people try and go back and live those normal consensus lives after a experience like this, then they start losing their North Star, or their center point, right? Because their soul has seen what they're supposed to do, and then they're going back and doing this entire programming, conditioning, belief system thing, and you're going to rebel against that internally. All right, one last question. When are the applications for your next course opening up?
So next one, we're actually going to do a relationship course.
Okay.
It's in the works.
You're not doing the Embodied Soul Awakening course again now?
So we're going to do the Soul Awakening course, but probably not until 2023 again.
Yeah, so we are planning, because with the relationships, everything when we are in the works, we want to create a relationship course, like an 8-week, really diving deep into that. Also, especially for people looking for a partnership in this day and age. So we're working on this, which we want to offer now towards the end of the year. And then we do the big one, time of transition, embodied soul awakening, most likely at the beginning of 23.
Yeah, the best way to get notified is go to Bernhard's website, veilofreality.com, and there'll be a pop-up where you can sign up for his newsletters, and he always announces it first on the newsletter. So that's how you can get notified.
Because we just started a new round.
Yeah, I know. I think that started in August to July.
Exactly, and that's going till October, and then we're thinking about having this relationship course start in sometime November, and then do the next time of transition and the Embodied Soul Awakening, the 12-week one, beginning of
you guys are also doing an in-person retreat sometime in 2023, right?
Yeah, we'll see. Like we're gonna.
We're working on it.
Yeah, we're working on it. We got to find the right place.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Cool. I think we've run out of questions. Thank you so much, you both. And
thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sure
there's a time. Thanks so much, Mugdha.
Sorry?
Thank you so much. It was a great time. Great questions. It was good.
Yeah, great questions. Yeah.
It's like like people were like, who are these people, right? Laura, Bernhard, you keep talking about them.
We are.
Yeah. So, all right. I'm
All right.
gonna
Beautiful.
call it a day. I have to get to work in the morning tomorrow. I don't know how I'm going to
Yes, you
do
gotta
that
go to bed.
in the night. And I'm so pumped up right now because we've been speaking about such great stuff. So I have to like do something to
Yeah,
calm
we can
down.
do it again. That was fun.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, you both. Much love.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care. Much
Take
love.
care. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
I mean,
Bye.
have a good day, not good night to you guys.
I mean, yes.
Bye.